So in this video, we're going to go over the handout from Chapter 4. We're going to ask some basic questions involving statistics and return. Here are the four questions, A, B, C, and D. So the first question, A, on the basis review, which stock appears more risky and why? We're looking at these two stocks. They have a similar range here. This has a top range of 13 and a low range of 7. And this has a low range of 5 and a top range of 11. So I would say it's pretty hard to tell which stock, A or B, appears more riskier. I would have to actually use statistics to help me with this. So in part B, calculate the standard deviation and coefficient of variation for each stock and example. Okay, so for both stocks, I'm going to start by calculating the average. To do this, I'm going to open up my function box, type in average, and I get an average here, and it's just going to put in the range and hit OK, and I get an average. Let me open it up, and I'm going to copy this cell and get an average for B. So here are the average returns for A and B. All right. Now I'm going to conduct a standard deviation to help me determine which of these two stocks, A or B, is more risky, because I can't really tell still. Okay, so I'm going to put in the average return, 10.40 here, and I'm just going to have I'm going to multiply it by 100. So I'm working with whole numbers here. And in column 3, I'm going to subtract column 1 from column 2. So column 1, subtract 2, and I get the difference of the return to the average return. And now I'm going to square these by using the caret sign, which is above the 6, to the second power. So I'm going to square each of the differences, and then I'm going to find the sum. So I'm going to add up the sum. And here is the sum of all of the squares. Okay, now to find the first step, the next step into calculating the square root, and I'm going to have to take, the next step is calculating the square root and dividing by the sum divided by n minus 1 and find the square root of that. So first I'm going to take the sum and divide it by n minus 1. In this case, n is 5. There are 5 variables, permutations, and n minus 1. And we do this because it's a sample set. So all sample sets, we have to take the results and divide it by 5 minus 1. Okay. So this is the to get the standard deviation, though, I'm going to have to find the square root. So I'm going to look for the function for that, square root. Here we go. And I'm just going to get the square root of this number. Okay, so my standard deviation is going to be 2.79 for stock A. Now I'm going to do the same procedure for stock B, where first I'm going to write in the average return. Let me just format all these boxes at once. So I have the average return here. And then I'm going to take column 1 minus from column 2. And I have the differences. And then I'm going to square the differences. Let's copy the formula from over here. And then I'm going to again find the sum. And then I'm going to divide the sum by n minus 1, which again is 4, because there's 5 permutations, so that would be n is 5, and minus 1 makes it 4. So 27.2 divided by 4, and then I'm going to put in the formula for square root. Pop up my function box here for square root. Okay. And I have my second square root. Now, this by itself, if the average were the same, average return was the same, then I could say that stock A is riskier because it has a higher standard deviation. But because the two averages are different, I can't say that. That's where the coefficient of variation comes in. And so for the coefficient of variation, and that's I could make them into similar terms so I could see which is riskier. Okay, so the formula for coefficient of variation is going to be the standard deviation divided by the average return. So this is 27%. Bring this over here. Okay. Now, using the coefficient of variation, again, the higher the percentage, the more riskier. So it would say that stock B is riskier because there's a 30% coefficient of variation. So the higher the coefficient of variation, the more risk. Just like the higher the standard deviation, the more risk. Now, standard deviation is only comparable if the averages are the same. If the averages are different, we have to use the coefficient of variation to standardize the standard deviation to give us a better idea of what is riskier. So in this case, stock B is riskier based on the fact that the coefficient of variation is going to smooth out the actual risk and give us a better look at it, because you have to think of it in this terms. Because the average return on A is higher, it makes the overall returns less riskier because we're working from a higher return base. And stock B has a lower return, so even though it has a less, the standard deviation would show that stock B has less of a dispersion, but since the return is lower, it's riskier. And that's why stock A is less risky, because the return is higher even though the standard deviation is higher, and which will produce a lower coefficient of variation. So on part C, okay, so calculate, we did that part B. In part C, on the basis of calculations in part B, what stock is more riskier? And that would be stock B. And part D, does the coefficient of variation provide better risk comparison than the standard deviation? In this case, yes, and it has better risk can compare risk better because it's taking into account the average returns when looking at risk in relationship to the dispersion with the standard deviation. Okay, so now these handouts are available online, which you could download, and I do also have the answer keys. And you could see in this answer key, I'm going to bring up the answer key here. And let me increase this a bit. And it's a bit too much. Decrease it. Okay. And we were actually working on example 2 that I worked out. Now you could see here, in example A, the average returns are identical. So we don't really need to calculate a CV because the standard deviation is, in this case, 10.4 versus 3.2. So clearly stock A is riskier. And if you look at the dispersions here, you could see how we go from 1% to 26%, which is a lot bigger dispersion than stock B. So here you can clearly say that A is riskier, and the standard deviation agrees with that. Now, in this case, you would not have to calculate a coefficient of variation because the average returns are identical. But if you do calculate the coefficient of variation, you're going to get the same results as the standard deviation because the returns are identical. So you always, in this case, if the standard deviation here is higher in stock A than stock B, then the coefficient of variation will always be higher in stock A than in stock B. Okay, so that should be enough of an explanation. Go ahead and try to get this handout, print out this handout, and do example 3 by yourself and see how you did. And you'll also see similar questions in the homework and possibly on the test. Okay, remember to like and subscribe.